Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Olga Howard, and I'm super excited to share this voice case study with you. But before I do, I want to present the team that worked on this experiment. This was a cross-functional team from KCT in LA, California. Michelle Merker was the producer. Nicole Quirk was the director of broadcast operations, and Jason Bazalar, the web development manager. All these folks were amazing. Now, in terms of search behaviors, I don't think there's anyone out there who still needs to be convinced that voice search is quickly taking over. This is one of many studies that tell us voice search is becoming the primary way that users search for content, and there are many others. So if you think of it from that perspective, and theoretically speaking, as more and more people search using voice rather than web, content that is not produced with voice search included will not be able to compete with content that can be found using voice. And it doesn't stop there. User context is also being derived from voice search. What is the searcher's intention? Will this answer require multiple turns? Is this a conversation? What is the searcher's attitude? What could this person be feeling or thinking? And what is the searcher's tone? Is it humorous or is it serious? All these influence context, and that context could determine what the search results will be. So we conducted a simple test to learn how PBS shows compare with other networks when it comes to findability through voice. When we asked Google, "Hey Google, when does the show Nature come on?" we got very little. Then we asked Google, "Hey Google, when does the show Young Sheldon come on?" In that case, we got the answer we wanted. So what's the difference? How can we make content findable and discoverable? So to find out, we did some research and we conducted an experiment. We wanted to see if we could improve findability, but first, let me show you the difference between when we started the experiment and the result after our work. This is what we heard before we started the work. "Hey Google, when does the show Actors on Actors come on?"
Sorry, I couldn't find any listings for that show.
And this is what we heard after we finished the experiment. "Hey Google, when does the show Actors on Actors come on?"
Reruns of Variety Studio. Actors on Actors will air on Saturday on PBS, WETA 4, at 7 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. and on Monday at 5 a.m.
As you can see, we got the answer we wanted. It was very exciting. But let me show you the research that we conducted so you can see how the whole thing progressed. Now, there was quite a bit of work to do. First, we looked far and wide to learn what the experts were saying. And we found this awesome report by Josie. Now, our work is definitely connected to her recommendations. And in this presentation, we're going to show you some of that, but it doesn't go in depth. So I do recommend that you look at her website to learn more about this. We also investigated the metadata landscape. We wanted to know what the difference is between different types of shows. Remember, we're focused on using only metadata to improve findability. And you can think of metadata as the pipes that allow data to flow from one system to another. So the more similar metadata terms are used in each system, the easier it is for the systems to pass information from one to another. And here we wanted to see what other networks were using. What metadata elements were they using out in the internet? And we also looked at structured data. Now, structured data is hidden code that is meant for machines to communicate to each other. And so when we're talking about robots learning who you are or what you do, this is what they're looking at. This is how you're communicating to that robot that you are selling shoes or you're selling streaming videos. So it's very important that you have this markup code, the schema markup, embedded on your website. Now, in terms of the actual experiment, we had a goal, and that goal was to prove out the actions recommended by the experts and to include our learnings from the metadata research we conducted. But in order to do that, we needed a partner. So we asked the PBS SoCal team if they would participate, and they agreed to participate. So it was an awesome team that they brought together. Now, in terms of the team, we had a producer of the show, Variety Studio Actors on Actors. And we also included the cross-functional team that normally works on the show. So this is all the normal people that work on the show all the time. We didn't bring anybody new into the mix from the perspective of outside of the organization hiring someone new. So you don't actually have to hire new people. But we did include the developer that is in the organization. We included that developer into the project, and that was new. So it's important to note that if you do conduct this experiment yourself, that you have all of those different roles in the team. Now, in terms of the approach, there are three main aspects to the approach of this particular experiment. So first, there must be governance in order to manage the metadata elements. And there must be structured data so that the web property can, as I mentioned before, announce to the internet what kind of property it is. Is it a shop selling shoes or is it a shop selling streaming videos? And finally, there must be corroboration of data on the internet. If you have corroboration on the internet, when someone searches for your content, the search engines or robots, as I like to call them, they will go out in the internet and they will look at your website. They will look at the different metadata aggregators, and they will find the information, and they're going to decide based on all of that information, based on corroborating all that information, that in fact your property is the one to present to the searcher. So when you think about your own project and what you want to include in it, this is what you want to include in it, all of these elements. Now, the experiment began with a baseline test. We wanted to make sure that we tested the prominent devices that people are using today. And it's important to also note that we wanted to use devices that did not have screens, because that makes a difference in terms of what data is presented. At the end of the day, if you have a search device that does not have a screen, you really only get one answer. And that's really what we were going for. We wanted to see what that one answer was. And the other part that we wanted to test, and I haven't mentioned this before, is that we wanted to see how these technologies would handle natural language. And that's why we chose to ask questions that contain part of the show title, but not the complete title. And we chose words that any person would use. So that's why we asked when the show comes on rather than when the show airs. And as you can see from the search results, Google Assistant is much better equipped to handle natural language. Also, the other part that's important to know is that location matters. If you look at the responses on the Virginia row, you'll notice that in Virginia, Google couldn't find the show, even though at the time the show was being broadcast all over the country. And you'll notice that on the California side, Google found the exact answer that was needed. And it's important to note that the actual producer is in LA. So you can see how location matters a great deal when we're talking about search. When we designed the experiment, we wanted it to contain both the governance activities and the corroboration activities. And the first activity is to create an industry-aligned metadata model. The PBS metadata model aligns to EIDR, that is the Entertainment Identifier Registry. It aligns with Movie Labs, and it aligns with Gracenote. And currently, we are adding alignment to the ODRL standard. Now, the next thing you do is you must know all of the places where your audience views your content. Everything from cable to YouTube TV, and all the places where you promote your content. Anything from Twitter or YouTube. On top of that, you want to know who in your organization is accountable for the content in those platforms, because in this work, those are the people who are going to help you. And you will create a metadata crosswalk. This is a document that identifies all the data in each of the departments in your organization and what they call that data. When you start doing the work, you're going to find that sometimes they have the same data, but they call it something different. So you want to make sure that you understand that. Now, once you know what data is flowing through your organization, you'll want to know when data is coming into the organization and when the data is needed. The information lifecycle is going to help you align that particular scenario. When is data needed and when data comes in? Those are all the governance activities in this experiment. And then after you've done that work, you want to then complete the corroborator activities. Now, we talked about structured data earlier, and structured data is the first of the corroborator activities you're going to want to complete. This is how your website will announce to the internet what its purpose is. As I mentioned before, is this the shop selling shoes? Or is this the shop selling streaming videos? And as I mentioned before, search engines use this information to corroborate with data aggregators that in fact your web property is the one to present to the searcher. And one of those data aggregators is Wikipedia. And you want to create a Wikipedia page. The purpose of Wikipedia is to connect your web property to the Wikipedia environment. So everything inside Wikipedia is full of links and connections. Robots will go into Wikipedia and they will sift through all of the information to find that match to your web property. And sometimes if you notice on your Google search results, you're going to find Wikipedia content on the search page, on the first search page. So we know that Wikipedia is a super important part of the search environment. And finally, for media content, you will create an IMDb page. Sometimes when you're searching, when you search something like a TV show, any kind of media, and you will notice that on the search results page, there's a great deal of IMDb content presented. So we know that Google and IMDb have a very strong partnership as well. So you want to be able to have these data aggregators a part of the ecosystem that you're creating for your data. So this is the full scope of the experiment. Let me show you the work that we did in governance. So before I start, I do want to mention that in order for you to be able to achieve your goal, you have to be super organized. And in order to be super organized, you need to do the governance activities because they will help you get organized in a way that allows you to know what data needs to go where and to include the right people into the project. Now, the first and most important part of governance is that you must have an industry-aligned metadata model. This is the PBS metadata conceptual model and the different industry standards that we align to today. As I mentioned before, we are currently implementing ODRL, so we will also have that included in the future. So this is how our metadata model is structured. It contains series, which is the logical grouping of narrative episodes distributed under the same title. And inside the series, we have seasons. And now the seasons will mark the initial release of a group of episodes. Inside the season, we have episodes. Now, we have 3 different types of episodes. We have a main episode, and this type of episode is one that runs on a sequence to continue a story. So with this episode, you couldn't watch one episode without missing the story. You have to watch them in sequence. Then we have special episodes. And these are part of the series, but they're outside of the narrative or the story. So this is something like a Christmas special. And we also have standalone episodes. So the standalone episodes are self-contained and they can be viewed in any sequence, but they're always part of the series. Every episode has an edit. And the edit is the unique version of the episode. So for example, if you had a director's cut, that would require different edits. If you have any type of artistic difference in the episode, that would require a different edit. And inside the edit, we have the manifestation. And the manifestation is what tells us the technical type that is delivered to the viewer. So is this delivery in HD or is it in SD? Now, all of these different parts of the metadata model are aligned to IDER. So when we register our shows in the IDER registry, then all of the data that is included in this part of the metadata model will be pushed through into the IDER universe. And inside the manifestation, we have the technical physical asset. And now the physical asset is aligned to movie labs. And finally, we have the events. Every file contains an event, and this is how the show is delivered to the viewer. Is it linear, or is it on demand, or is it streamed? And this entity aligns to Grace Note. Now, if you think of data models, they are providing a bird's eye view of how the subject areas or entities relate to each other. So in this example, we have the series, which contains the seasons, and the seasons contain the episodes, and the episodes contain events. So in other words, data models create these relationships, and those relationships are what systems use when moving data around in the ecosystem. That's why it's important that you have this metadata model, because that's how the systems are able to understand these relationships and move data around in the correct fashion. Now, the next thing you must do is to identify all the places where viewers see your content. We talked about this before. So where viewers see your content could be anywhere where you're like a cable company, or maybe you're streaming it linearly, like a live linear streaming. But you also want to know where your content is being promoted. So think of things like your cable company, or your YouTube TV, or your Twitter, the place where you're sending your promotions. So all of these places, all of these platforms that are currently delivering your content, you want to know what all those platforms are, and you want to identify all of the places where data is flowing. So for example, you have reports probably internally that use some of that data. So you want to know what that is. And you also have systems internally that contain some of that data, that move data around in your organization. So you want to know that too. And once you know all of these platforms and places where your data is being sent, then you want to know who the folks are in your organization who own and are accountable for those systems, and all the data, the data that flows through those systems. Because as I mentioned earlier, all these people that are managing the data that's flowing through all these platforms and those internal systems, all these people are the people that are going to help you do all of this work. So you want to make sure that you have a really good sense of who those folks are. Now, once you have all of that information, and as I mentioned before, you know who these people are and you know what departments they're in, now you're going to create your metadata crosswalk. So because you've completed that content discovery portfolio, now you have a super clear understanding of all the data that flows through all of the systems. And now you know what data is needed. And because of that, you know what metadata is needed. So this crosswalk is going to help you identify whether the different departments or groups use the same data, but they label it something different. So all of the people that you had in your content discovery portfolio that are accountable for the data that flows through those systems, those are the people that you're going to include in this, and you're going to ask them whether or not they use the data, and if they do, what do they call it? And so this is where you find things where some people will call a description, whereas others will call it a synopsis. And so this is where you start to really create an understanding of where the gaps are in terms of not only the people and how they speak, but also the systems and how the systems either speak to each other or don't speak to each other. Now, in terms of the next part of governance, the information lifecycle. Now, once you've gone through the work of aligning all your departments and systems, you'll want to know when the data comes into the organization and when the data is needed. This is going to help you understand the gaps. So you're going to find out that sometimes data is late. And that is going to be common because the systems and the people haven't yet started talking to each other in the organization. So they're not quite sure when data is supposed to be there. So it arrives late. And you are going to find that sometimes some of these departments, they need data later than you thought, or even before than you thought. So now you can start to align this need to the actual data. And this will help you organize the different workflows that may be required, or maybe the changes in the systems that may be required, so that you can then begin to create this alignment for your teams. And so it's a super important part of the work. So this is the last of the governance work that needs to be done. And the next thing that needs to be done is to work on your corroborators. So we are actually out of time now. So I cannot continue to show you those, but I will show them to you next time. So I'm super excited that you were able to join me for this. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you again, where I can present the rest of the experiment with the corroborators and the result. Again, as you saw, we actually got the result we wanted. So this experiment actually worked really well. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you.